Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to look at how you can use scripting to create smarter categories to help organize your vMix inputs. So before we get into that, I, as always, want to invite everybody, if you have any comments, any questions, please just post them in the fields below based on where you're watching, and we'll try to get to them live on air. Also, if you'd like to join us live on the show, we do have a link. It's in the show notes, and we'll put it up on screen that will let you get somebody from the studio to, connect you and bring you on with us. So I've sort of teased this out a bit yesterday for what we're going to do today. So what I'd actually like to do is let me show you sort of what the MultiView is, and this will help sort of set the stage for some of the things that we actually want to do in this show with scripting. So if we go to the multi-box, this is showing basically a multi-view which has 9 slots, and it shows a category at the top. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to say I want to see where this is just a fictitious show with multiple players on 2 teams. So I just say I want to see all the players. So if I press that, I can now see a multi-view that's showing all the players, and the category indicated above says #player. So these are all the inputs that are tagged as a player. But I could also go and say, I want to see all the people that are on Team A. Now, what you'll notice is that we kept the inputs that were already on that were in the player category. We just kept the ones that were on Team A, and then we have a multi-box shot showing people from TA, the host of the Team A team, and then a multi-box with the host of the Team A and the Team B team. So you can see here that we have the ability now to have the same inputs come up in multiple categories that we set. And this can be very useful because lots of times you're not thinking of things as being in discrete buckets, but you really turn around saying, I want to see all the players, I want to see all the coaches, I want to see all of my multi-box shots to pick the right one, things like that, where there'll be a lot of overlap, but this will let you sort of organize around all of that. So that's what we're going to take care of today. So probably it's the next step would be we can jump into vMix, but before we have that, we have a fair number of comments already coming in. So let's jump in and we'll sort of say hi to everybody that has joined us. So Spatial Optic is saying he's cooking popcorn for the show. He just needs to get popcorn first. Hi, Spatial. It's good to see you. Thank you for joining. So, and Marco Fabri is getting a coffee. That is the best thing. That's the most important piece of gear in the studio. If I had one UPS, it'd be on the coffee machine. So this is. So we have Michael from Copenhagen. Michael, thanks for joining us here. Always good to see you. And let's see. We have Multimedia Max from Belgium. So he's doing a show for Sunday at the same time he's watching. So thank you for splitting your attention to join us here. I appreciate that. So Yuda Man, he's here, and that's always great. Thank you for joining us. Love to have you here. We have Jeff Adams. Jeff, good friend of mine and a really great guy. Jeff, thank you for joining us here. We have Eric Goodman. Hello, Eric. Thanks for joining. And we have Automation for vMix from Vargada, Sweden. Automation, thanks. Good to see you again. We have Pau Salvador from the Netherlands. Pau, Thank you for joining us. Good to see you here. We have Felipe Cardoso from Portugal. Felipe, great to have you here. Thank you. All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining and for saying hello. It's always a great way to start the show. So let me actually discuss a bit of the approach that we took here. And the biggest reason I thought this could be interesting is that, well, vMix does have categories, those little color tabs that you can sort of label, and they've extended that with additional tabs. So lots of different things inside. So this is sort of your typical vMix categorizations. One of the limitations, though, is that you can only place an input in one of those categories. So if you wanted to do things where you could see all your players or teams, that means that those inputs can't go into anything else that you want to set up. So that can be fairly limiting when you're wanting to use the categories as a way to actually work your production workflow, to build around your production workflow. So we wanted to do something that would give you that additional layer of flexibility. And the other thing is that we wanted to create a multi-view that would display all of the inputs that match a category. So this is like up to 9 in this case, but if you wanted to, there's ways to create things that could be much deeper with far more inputs if that were necessary, but we thought that the 9 was probably a good general number to work against. And the other thing that we're doing is we wanted to make sure that we would be able to use the search tab as a way to look at the inputs that you selected in a category. So for example, you can see right now I'm in the search tab, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch through some of these categories. So there's all the players, there's the team A, there's the multi-box shots, there's the host. So I am actually taking and using the standard inputs in vMix as well. So if you didn't want the multi-view, you didn't want to set all that up, you'd still be able to navigate through all these different categories, and then you'd be able to leverage that. The other thing we did is that we created something where, since these would be in slots, so you can sort of see here, I have slot 1, slot 2, slot 3. I can tell vMix to just switch in whatever is one of those slots. So I can say switch in slot 3, and it automatically will just take whatever is in that slot and do the switch there. And that, that works if I switch to another multi-box shot. So let me sort of do this, and let me do something bigger. So we got all the players here. So if I were to sit here and take this now, I have 6. If I hit 3, it's going to take this new one down here, which is number 3, as opposed to the shot we took before. So this gives you that sort of flexibility in the production context. So not only does it help you organize the inputs, but it also gives you a framework for selecting that category of input and then switching between them using one set of buttons. So you don't need to set up a Stream Deck or any type of X keys with 50 different inputs. You can turn around and say, no, I need 10 buttons, and I'm going to bucket things into slots that fit in my multi-view. So something like that can definitely work. So as we go through this, how do we assign categories? So the first thing we do, if I look here, is we didn't have a lot of different ways to do this. So what we did is we added them into the title. So I can sort of sit here and go, okay, here are the categories that I want to add. So if I have any ones that I want to create with any sort of names, they can all be logical. All I have to do is do hashtag the text and a space for what I want as a category, and it will see that as a category. And when I start up my script for this, it actually builds a map of all the categories and the associated inputs with each of those categories. And that's the core framework here. So how do we actually get this to work with the search capability? We create a separate category called hashtag active, and we set the search category in standard vMix to hashtag active. And then anytime we switch these category groups, I go into the title of each of the inputs and I append hashtag active to it. So that means that I now have a way to work not just with my MultiView, but also inside the standard vMix footprint. And just to note, in order to get that search to happen, you have to switch out of the search category and back into it. So we do that in the scripting as a very quick toggle on and off to get that new search to happen. So in this vMix preset, because this will sort of define some of the stuff you'll see us do, the way we have this set up, and I'll sort of switch to all the inputs here. So I have this set up, as I said, 2 teams. So I have sort of my team A here, and these are all the players for team A. I have all these players here for team B. I have a set of multi-box shots. This is all everybody on team A in one shot, everybody on team B. Then I have my MultiView set up here. But then at the end, I also said, let me add a host for team A and a host for team B, which is sort of like their coach or mentor. And then I have a multi-box of these 2 hosts. So this is the framework that we set up inside of vMix to make sure that we had a logical use case for how these categories with overlapping inputs could actually be put to use. So right now, let me just see if we have anybody else that has jumped on the comments, and then we'll jump into the code. So we have Tosan Oru from Nigeria. Tosan, thank you for joining us. Great to have you here. And we have Michael with a thumbs up. Michael, thank you. So we also, and I guess we're not getting all the inputs from Facebook right now, but we have somebody, just got told, Dennis from Facebook has said hi. So Dennis, thank you for joining. I'm sorry I don't have your comment here, but we definitely welcome you joining. And I believe Richard, we have also on Facebook. So Richard, thank you for joining us as well. Definitely appreciate it. Okay, so let's jump into the code now. So as I look at this, the way I have this set up is that we start out where this script will run. It runs in the background. And the first things it will do is it will go through all of the inputs, read the titles, find the individual category codes, the hashtag categories that we set up on each title, and it's going to build a map of this. So that map is going to be structured where when you find a category, you look if it exists already, and if it does, you simply append the input that's associated with that category. And if it doesn't, you add that as a new category and then continue with the input. So what I'd like to do, really before I jump into this next level, is I want to talk just a smidge about how this map we're building is actually set up inside the code, because it's using a couple of new structures that we really haven't done much with in the past. So the first thing we're using is something that's called a dictionary. So a dictionary in vMix script, or in VB.NET really, is a way to say I want to assign a key or a name and then a value with that name. So it's really, I can go in and say, look up this name or this key and then give me the value associated with it. So that's the first thing we're doing. And so we have created in the code, we have a variable called category map, which we'll get to, which is a dictionary that has this name value pairs. And the name in this dictionary is the category. It's a string that contains the category name. And the value is where we have a list. Now, a list is very much like an array, where you sort of say, I can have, 15 or 20 or 30 elements in it, and I just index them each. The difference, though, is that, the primary difference is that a list allows you to grow it easily or to remove things, sort of manipulate what's in that list, as opposed to an array, which sort of once you set it up, it's a fixed size and that's it. So a list allows us to keep adding things to it. And that's ideal for adding inputs. And that's exactly what we do. We have this value in the name value pair is a list of string array. And that string array contains two elements. The input title, so we know what input the title of that input is, and the key of the input, so we can actually reference that. And so when we put this together into this dictionary, what we have is the name, which is our index, is the category, #player. And the values, which is a list of strings in an array of strings, is these arrays of the name, the input name title, and the input key, which is how you access it. So that's what we're actually building out here. So when we do this code, this was really important. If I didn't like explain this well, it would really be difficult for you to understand what we're doing in the code. But hopefully this gives you a clearer picture of how all this would come together. So let's jump back into the code now, and we'll sort of go through generally what we have. Up front, we have a whole set of variables that we really use to sort of manipulate everything with the title and the inputs and everything that are coming, that we're getting from each one of the inputs. And this is really just, all the setup stuff. We turned around and said, well, what is the modifier that we're going to change on the title so that we know that this is one of the active inputs in a specific category? And so that we just set up as a variable. So you could change it. This is #active, but you could make this anything. But that's the use case here for active title modifiers. How I'm going to modify the title to say this input is now one of the active inputs. And here is where we're creating the two things we just talked about. The list that we make, which is the title and the key for each one of the inputs, is called original inputs, and that's our list. And to set this up, you have to basically use a library, for lack of a better term, which includes this element. And so a list is in systems collection generic.list. So that's just what you need to do in this case to get this set up. And what we're saying is, so this is a list, and this list has an array of strings. So it's one array of strings, and then the list has another array, and then another array, and that's how you just keep adding these arrays of strings. And those arrays contain title and key. Now, the category map, very similar. It's a collection, in the system collections generic and dictionary, but that's what you have to do to set this up. And it uses a string. So that's the first element, the key or the name in a name value pair inside the dictionary. And then we're doing basically the system collections generic list of strings, because what we're going to do is, as we build this, we're going to use original inputs as the source for filling out the rest of our map. And so what we'll have when this logic is done is a list in this dictionary of all the different categories, and then, there's a enumeration of all the different categories, and then associated with each one of those categories is a list of the inputs that are tagged with that category. And that's how we're going to manipulate. So that's what we're working to build here. So usual stuff here. We have just indices we use for doing looping and other things. We want to access the vMix XML because we are using the dynamic values to pull in exactly what we want to do with this background loop when we want to select a category or something like that. So this is basically how we start. And so we're pulling an XML node list of all of the elements inside our vMix XML that are associated with inputs, because we want to grab all of the inputs and start working with them. So to build this map, we're using a looping technique called for each. And what this does, it basically takes whatever the variable you place here, and it enumerates all of them. So it says, go through all of this for each one of the entries that you have in this node list. And that's what we're doing here. So it's basically taking each node that's in our node list, and we're working on it. And so all we do now is we start to pull this all apart. So we have a temp input that we're creating a new string array in, and that basically takes the title and the key for the current input in, as we enumerate through the node array, the node list. And we're going and we're saying, if this already has the active title modifier in it, like take it out because we don't want to use it. That's not part of the map we want to use. So we just take that out and we say, so now we have the basic, title plus all the keys that were added to that title outside of the one that we would use to say it's active or not. And we put that away. So that's our clean title. And we just add this to original inputs as, since original inputs is a list, we can do add. So we take these key value pairs and we add it in to our original inputs list. That's the first piece. That's some validation messages we put here. Now we take the input title, which we sort of pulled out of this array, and we start to clean up, say, let's get rid of spaces, let's get rid of any quotation marks, other things that could impact how we parse it. So we really take the title now and strip it down into a title, hashtag, and then keys. And that's basically what we end up with in the title when we're done. And this is just doing a replace. So it looks at the string and says, if you see this in the string, replace it with this. And it just goes through the whole string. So again, very simple ways to manipulate all the things we just pulled out from the current input. So then we're doing something called split. We used this in our previous show, I think for how we were doing the updates for the crawl, where you wanted to flip values that way. So we're using the same thing here now. And we're saying, let's take and use this hashtag as a divider, and we'll pull all of the things we find between these hashtags out of the title. And so that gives us basically an array in parse title with all of first the original title portion, like the team-A1, that's the regular title. And then after that, each next element in the array is one of the category codes associated with it. So that's how we set this up. Now, we're not really interested in that first part, that first title element, the team A-A1 sort of thing, because that's not that's not an actual category code. That's simply the title piece. So really what we're interested in is the category code. So we're looking here and saying, the count of categories will be everything that we pulled out minus that first one. So that's why we're taking the one away, and that creates the length of it. And now all we're doing is, those are all my categories, and I'm just looping through each of those categories, and I'm seeing, does it exist? So that's the first thing. If this category map does not exist, if this category does not exist in the category map, then we're going to say, okay, let's add a new entry with this category. So now you're starting to see how this is coming together. I'm looking at the category. If it exists, I'll just add the input keys to it. If it doesn't exist, I add the category as a new category and then add the input keys. So now as this loops around, that's exactly what's happening. I'm just building out my dictionary with each one of my categories, and then associated with those categories, I'm just adding to the list. So, if I have a category that already exists because there was a previous input with it, all I do is say, okay, I have that. I don't have to add it to my dictionary. But what I do need to do is take the value piece of what's associated with that category and add this input as another input associated with that category. That's how all this code works. And it's very simple. We're just doing this loop. But now this gives you a total map of everything inside of your vMix session. So if I say I want to look at a category, I now can look and say, what are all the inputs? Just go in my dictionary and I can see what are all the inputs associated with this category. And that's how we manipulate everything now in the sort of static loop piece where it just keeps looping. So all of this is set up now. And so like before, we're going to use the dynamic values 1 and 2 to do sort of action and a variable on the action. So we have a limited set of actions, but I'll get into that as we do the switch statement. But so we set it up to say the non-action action, 0, do nothing. And we set the initial dynamic value 2 to a category of blank. There is no category selected. So this gives us now a sort of a clean slate. We're not asking to do any actions, and we have no category selected. Then what I do is I go through the MultiView, and I just basically take the input for the MultiView, which is called MView overlay, and I set the text for it to go and say, okay, what's the category that's going to be associated? And in this case, because we're just starting, it's none selected. So it shows up and says there's no category. And we put a blank seat. We loop through the 9 inputs inside our MultiView, and we just put a sort of a blank in there and say, okay, there's nobody in the MultiView right now. And then we dive in and begin our loops. That's all the stuff to initialize it. And now this is going to be very familiar. We just load the vMix XML. We pull the dynamic value 1 and dynamic value 2 out and assign them to action and category that we want to work with. And then I just have my select case. And there's really 2 main things that we're doing here. The case 0 is do nothing and just wait a half second when we loop. The next one, case 1, is where I am basically setting a new category as active. So we'll go through this in a bit more detail here. And as we do with all this, when you first come into one of these switch statements, to a case in a switch statement, you want to reset the dynamic value back to 0 and the action dynamic value 1, the action dynamic value back to 0, to make sure that if you fall through out the bottom of the loop, you're not coming back and doing the same thing over in sort of an infinite loop. So that actually make sure you only go through this all once. I reset all of the titles. So this is cool because I have the original titles for everything. I just go and map everything back. Say I'm going to select a new title. So I want to take any title that may have had active associated with it, and I want to clean that out and make sure that doesn't exist anymore. And all you see now are the titles, the original titles as we saw them when we first parsed everything. And so that's all I'm doing here. I'm just going and resetting all the input names for the number of inputs that we have in the vMix preset. So the next thing I do is I make sure that a category has actually been set. So, you could end up where I told it to go and sort of go to a category, but this category, there's no category there. And so if that's the case, if there's no category set, we just exit and we don't try to do anything. But if we do find a category, that's where we start to do the work. So I basically go in and say, if the category map contains the key category, so that category is in our dictionary that we set up, then I'm just going to go through and say, let me look at all the inputs that are associated with this category. And that's what we're doing here. So we know inside the category, because this is a dictionary, when I ask for something like the count, how many elements are in this, what it's telling me is for this category, those are the number of values that are associated with that category. And so I'm just for I equals 0 through that, -1, because it's all 0 based. So we sort of bump down 1 to 0 and the top number -1. And we go through all this. And all I'm doing now is I am taking and I'm basically building each of the inputs that are supposed to have be active. I'm going through each of them and saying, taking each input one by one that's associated with this category. And I am changing the name. So this just basically lets me go here and I created a title a temporary title with the active title modifier, that hashtag active, and I'm just rewriting those names. And then in the MultiView, because that's my new category, I'm simply going and saying at the top of that MultiView, change the name of the category to whatever the category name is. And you can see, I mean, some of this is, it may not be as obvious, but all this code is up, so you'll be able to sort of dig through it directly on your own. But so this is just letting us go through and say, I'm updating each one of the, each element in the multi-view to write that out. And that's all I'm doing where I'm setting layers. And so that puts out all my inputs into the layers in the multi-view. When I'm done, I'm then saying for whatever's left, if there are only 5 inputs associated with this title, and I have 9 slots in my multi-view, I take slot 6 and on, and I blank them out. So that's what I do, the remaining multi-view slots. And then at the top, I set the text to say, and this is the category that we have that these inputs are associated with. And that's basically how we do all of this stuff. The other thing that you'll notice, because I said that you have to toggle out of the search tab and back into it, that's what we're doing with these last 2 calls here. So I'm just going to say toggle all and then toggle back to search. And for this to happen, that just needs that transition, and it's very quick. You really don't notice it. Doesn't like do a big flicker or anything, but that gives you a way to now update what's in the search. So all the inputs that I tagged with #active are now going to be discovered and will be set up as a in the search, so you can see them in search as well. So you don't necessarily have to use the multi-view. So that's the key construct in how all of this tagging works, setting up the multi-view and making all that work. But the other piece we had is we want to be able to say, if I have a fixed button, I can press that button and it will take whatever is in a slot in the multi-view and it will fade to that in my program. So if I look at this, that's where I set up these additional cases. So I have because I was using this, I said case 11, 12, that's sort of switch to 1, switch to 2. So that's the 11 and 12. That's just the logical thing to keep it where it's 1, 2, 3, and I can track that. So all I'm doing here is if I want to use whatever is in slot 1, I just go and say, reset the action back to 0, or we always do. And I go and say, okay, if the category map is less than the number that I'm switching to. So I say I want to switch to 5 and there is no 5. That's what you catch here. If I want to switch to 1 and there is no 1, then you just exit. But if there is, all I do is say, I want you to fade the input in the category map 0, 1. So it's basically saying take whatever that input is in this case, the 0th element in my list, and switch to that. And that's all I'm doing. So my category is a dictionary. The category is the name, and this is the value pair. So I'm saying, okay, take 0 because 0 index, it always starts, the first element is indexed by 0. But that's all I'm doing here. So I just fading in whatever is in that category map for input 1, 2, 3, 4 associated with that category. So that's how I have this set up here. I just have a whole set of cases for switching between the first, the second, the third, and so on. So this makes it very, very flexible. Now I don't even have to think about sort of finding it and setting it up somehow or clicking on it in my UI. And I don't have to have a whole mass of buttons preset. I can simply go here and say, once I winnow it down into a bucket of slots in my multi-view, I just say, which slot do I want to go live? And I can switch to that. So that is really, I mean, this is all the ones up to sort of 19 for each one of the slots that we have. So that is basically the full logic that we're using here for this category model. And if you look, see if we could switch over to a 3-box with our Stream Deck and the vMix the vMix UI, because that is probably the best way to set this up. Inside of this, what we have here, so let's see if we can make this a little more visible. So what we have here now is these are the categories that I had set up. So you can see this here across the top. And if I sort of switch over to, let me show the search tab here. So if I come here and say, okay, I want to go for team A, you can now see all of these things have sort of switched over. And, so whatever I pick here, And then all I can do is say, okay, I want what's in slot 2 here. So you can see that now just faded in whatever was in slot 2. And so it's a very simple interface. 'Cause I could be sitting here now with, potentially, 100 different inputs. But if there's a logical way that I'm structuring them, it becomes very, very easy for me to say, okay, I want to go and sort of introduce all my players. So it'd be very easy for me now to go and say, okay, I can pull them all up one at a time. But then if I'm doing things where, okay, now I'm working with a team, I can just sort of say, okay, now we're working with team A. So switch over there and I can go and say, okay, let me take the multi-box of team A, and this is all set up. And it makes it very, very easy to manipulate with a very small footprint on my Stream Deck or your X keys or whatever, sort of interface device you're using to navigate through this. So I just wanted to be sure we sort of covered this, because I think this says a lot about how this can be leveraged inside of a production. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to cover in this show. Like I said, I'm trying to keep these shows around a half an hour. So, hopefully that makes it easier for everybody to stay engaged. So let's see if we have anything else in the comments here. Let's see. So Advent Media is Wolverhampton in England is joining us. Thank you, Advent Media. Definitely appreciate that. Ryocaster, welcome. Great to have you back here. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so hopefully this all made sense. This is all in the all up on our link in the show notes for how to download all this stuff. But what I'd like to do then is, if we don't have any immediate questions, I'll just jump over to our post show, and we can sort of pick up. And if there's anything else in the discussion anybody wants to get to, we'll definitely talk about it. If you can't hang out for the post show, I very much thank you for spending time with me this Friday afternoon or evening, based on where you are in the world. And we will see you next week. We'll see you in a couple of seconds. Take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our post-show hangout. So hopefully everybody found this interesting. I know the code itself was probably a little longer than we've done in the past, but hopefully the explanation around dictionaries and lists helped make the code itself easier to follow. So that was the point in adding that extra sort of slide in there to make sure that things were a little clearer. So Tosan, thank you. I'm glad you enjoy this. Eric, thank you. I appreciate you joining us here. So that's always great. So yeah, Michael, thank you for that. Yeah, I think a lot of these tools that are inside VB.net, sort of the basic model for Visual Basic, because it's leveraging VB.net 2.0. There's a lot of cool tools in there. I mean, some ones that are missing, I would love that to be upgraded, because there's a lot of stuff in later versions of .NET that would be really helpful. But things like indices and dictionaries are definitely great development components that help you organize things better. It makes things more structured for how you manipulate data. And after all, scripting is all about data manipulation fundamentally. How do I display it? How do I make decisions on it? How do I control other things leveraging it? So thank you, Michael. So in this, I think the biggest piece, this originally started where I was looking at how we could do something that came up in a comment that I'm trying to remember who posted the comment, and I apologize. my mind should be better than this, but it isn't. So, but it was posted in a comment about if there were a way to do this where you could switch to different groups of people and then pick, from that. So it was originally around using the organizational tool in vMix for categories, which is what those colored buckets. And if there's a way when I had one of the colored buckets selected, those little tabs across the top in the vMix UI, if there was a way to say, take the first guy in this bucket and do something, take the second guy in this bucket and do something. And because there wasn't, that got me thinking about sort of the whole categorization template. And then, from there, I started to think about how valuable it could be to do something where you had a single input in multiple buckets, because I can see a lot of cases for that. Oh, Spatial, thank you for joining. It's always great to see you here. You've been doing a lot of cool stuff online, and I definitely appreciate you making the time out to stop by with us. But let's see. Michael's saying, could you go a little deeper to the search tab? Yes, that would be fine. So let me sort of explain how we did the search tab. So why don't we switch over to sort of our 3-box so I can jump in and sort of show the vMix UI as well. See if we can do all that here. Okay, so very specifically, what we have here is in the search tab, I set this up in advance. So if you click on search, you can see what's the tag that I'm looking for in a title to do this search. So if I wanted to, like just generally the way the search tab works is I could just go and say, I'm looking for anything which has team dash. I probably uppercase. I don't know if it will work with sort of a mix. So team dash. So when I click OK, what this is going to come with is every title with the word team dash in it. So all I'm doing is leveraging this capability by tagging it with something very specific, in this case, hashtag active. And so that's really what I'm using to turn around and identify the inputs that the search tab will use. But the search tab is very generic. It basically says, take some text and find all the titles with that matching text and display them here in the search tab. So the way this is working is I'm adding the hashtag active to each one of the titles that I want to have involved in my category. And then I toggle out to all, and then I toggle back into search, and that triggers the search to happen again. Because when you do this through automation, and I say, go in and sort of select search, it doesn't automatically, if search is already selected, like where I had it down there, it doesn't redo that search. And because there is no way to tell search to look for something, like in the API, the only thing I could do is say, I can select the category, which inside our code, we had the set category. In doing that set category, I can just say, set category as search. So yeah, let's see over here. So yeah, select category basically says I can just tell it to select category search. I can't come and tell it, search and use this string when you do the search. That would have just made it easier because I have, mechanisms sort of to do that, and I wouldn't have had to append things to it. But if that were the case, and maybe it is, maybe there's some way to do this that is not apparent, but that's why we added that extra hashtag active as a category. But that's exactly how the search mechanism works. I keep it set to hashtag active in search, and that tab sits there. And anytime I go in and manipulate the titles to switch who has hashtag active, I toggle out of search and back into it, and it updates and shows it. And because this happens so quickly, it it almost is sort of invisible as we do that. So that's hopefully that covered it a bit more, because I know that's probably the least clear thing I did. Probably should have spent a little more time going through that. But so if you have any more questions, just get back on that, because I want to make sure we covered it. So Marco's saying that he hadn't seen the search tab before. But yeah, it's not something that's really obvious. And I think if there were ways to do, I mean, the two things I'd really like to see. So one of them is more control over the search tab through automation, because I think that's something that people could really use. The other thing, which I'd really love, is basically have something in the vMix API to set and retrieve notes with specific inputs. So that could be something where basically just a text field that could sort of sit in the input and be manipulated through APIs. So it could be so useful for so many different types of things that you want to do. Some of them could be things where you just want to continually update information at any time that input is displayed. You want to be able to pull that in, maybe put that in a lower third or something like that. So it just gives you another way, sort of another variable that you could leverage when you're dealing with an input to do things with scripting. But I think, those two things, better control of the search category and the ability to add sort of tags or notes or some other way to associate metadata directly with an input without having to create a separate structure, but sort of baked into vMix itself, that could be really great. All right. So I guess if that's everything, I mean, I want to allow time for anybody with any other questions, but if that's everything, I mean, I think we sort of covered everything code-wise, and it's all up there. So if you folks want to sort of download it and play with it, have at it. If you do something really cool and change it some way, let me know and share it. I'd love to see what everybody's doing with it. But it looks like that is the end of our show. So everyone, thank you very much for joining. Thanks for hanging out in our post-show hangout. And I'll see you all next week. So be safe, be well. Oh, wait, we have one other, just got it in under the line. So Michael's asking, an idea for a future show could be how to set up a 24/7 local show with smaller videos, news clips for a small community. If I had to use a CDN for it, I'd easily run out of terabytes of usage. Okay, yeah, let me see, what we could do for that. Sort of maybe this could be something that would be more of a show, sort of rundown automation process. I know we've touched on that in the past, but let me see if we could do something different and interesting with that. So, Michael, thank you. So, to everybody, be safe, be well. I'll see you next week. Take care.